Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Daniela from FaceUp, and today I'm joined by someone with deep experience in the realities of global employment and compliance. With more than 25 years in employment law, workforce risk, compliance, and governance, Miranda Zolot is the General Counsel and Secretary at Oyster. She is leading a team of more than 35 people across legal, compliance, IT, and is supporting Oyster's mission to employ and enable talent in more than 80 countries. Miranda has spent her career helping companies navigate global employment in a way that is both practical and also legally sound. She has worked across regions, cultures, and regulatory systems, and she brings a very clear view of the challenges that appear the moment a company begins operating internationally. We will talk about her perspective as general counsel, the complexities that she sees when companies expand across borders, and also Oyster's own journey building systems that support a distributed workforce. Part of that story also includes how her team manages reporting, trust, and compliance at scale. Miranda, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Daniela. This is one of my favorite topics.
Well, excited to dig in, so let's say. And we have prepared the conversation to go through, let's say, different levels. So let's start at the beginning with your background and your motivation. So you've had a long career in litigation, global employment, compliance, and also governance. So quite a broad list. What first drew you to this field and what continues to motivate you?
Well, what drew me to the law was really solving puzzles. I didn't come from a legal family. I didn't know any lawyers when I went to law school, so I honestly did not know what I was getting into. And when I got there, it was a little bit overwhelming, frankly. It was a lot more academic than I was, frankly. So I had a particular instructor, a professor, who really, really changed the way I thought about what was feeling very academic and stodgy. And he was explaining to the class that really law is a construct. And that construct creates order and allows society to function. Um, that's interesting just from an intellectual standpoint to think about, like, okay, what would happen if we didn't have law? And I think we've all seen the streaming shows that sort of show what that looks like, right? But secondly, the lawyers are the ones who create the construct. And so you can really be sort of a world builder as a lawyer, should you choose that route. And the fun, sneaky part is you also know how to get around the structure that's been built. And that to me was sort of an open challenge, not to subvert law, but really to understand, like, how flexible can it be? How can you get around? And that's a lot of what litigation does, is to kind of understand exactly where those points are in the law that are flexible or that you can work around, or that are places that can be pressure tested with your particular set of facts and evidence. So that really excited me. And I happened to be going to law school in the 90s, where it was a particularly dynamic time for employment law. So again, rather than these stodgy sort of laws that have been around for a long, at that point, the law was evolving from union-based worker protections to legislation that we all are very aware of now, like the ADA, like Title VII. And watching those laws develop real time through litigation was fascinating. It was literally seeing what my professor had talked about in action. So it's not a surprise to me, at least, that that's what I wanted to do. And so the rest is sort of history. I really enjoy employment law. It allows you not only to sort of understand how you might protect an employee or an employer or a company, but it also lets you see what your customers are doing, right? It's a little bit like taking visits into, what does a tech company look like? What does a steel company look like? What does it mean to be a marketer? And really getting to learn about all of those peoples, those companies, is really an exciting way to practice law.
You make it sound very, very exciting, I have to say. I hadn't thought of law that way, but there's such a joy when you talk about it. But I imagine that it's also a lot about seeing how the different pieces of the puzzle play together and come together. And so, yeah, very, very exciting to see your excitement about that. Um, Looking back at your work across these different organizations that you already mentioned, um, what has changed the most, in your opinion, in how companies think about global employment and workforce risk?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think employment law and how organizations think about it has continued to evolve from when I first was a baby lawyer. And with Oyster and with EOR now, we are continuing a part of that evolution, for centuries, really. Work was a place where you had a physical plant of some sort, and workers traveled to live near that plant and to create that thing. There are exceptions for maybe traveling sales folks, but generally that is the way that the world has done employment for centuries. Um, and that has started to change in a real way only in the last, bit of the last century, and mainly in the last, let's say, 10 years here, um, where employers no longer have to have the person physically present. Um, the technology that obviously we're all using, we're on now, allows us to be present anywhere in the world at any time. Obviously, through COVID, that sort of supercharged things when people couldn't actually be physically present. And what that's really doing is creating more opportunity and more complexity, but more opportunity for workers to find good work in places that are not down the street. You no longer have to go down the street to that employer, so they can stay where they want to be. They can go where they want to be. It creates opportunity for them. It also creates opportunity for the companies. They are no longer pulling from maybe the pool from their town or the adjacent towns. They may no longer have to worry about relocation packages and finding people to come where they are. They can look anywhere. They can look anywhere outside of the US, outside of wherever it is that they're typically working. And that's amazing. The problem is it's really complicated for employers that have been in perhaps the EU for a long time or perhaps in the US for a long time. You may have ways that you work around having folks in multiple locations. Maybe you have physical plants. So you might have some experience with that, but everyone had to get really smart really quickly in order to hire folks, to compete with other people that are trying to hire these folks, and to really keep your company relevant and your workforce relevant. And that continues to evolve even now as many companies are trying to pull people back into their workplaces and physical plants. And there's there's a lot of tension and rebellion against that in certain things. And it's creating, again, more challenges and complications for both the employees and employers. But, where there's a puzzle, there's a solution. And where there's a challenge, there's opportunity. So I think it's a great place and time to be both a worker and a company, because you have so many options that you didn't previously have.
That is true. I think the world has become a village. And me personally, I have been working remotely with companies that are not in my country for quite a few years now. But of course, I imagine that you've also seen companies make some mistakes along the way when they are expanding to other regions or hiring elsewhere.
Sure, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of mistakes to be made, right? But to start with, like, just think about the options, right? You have nearshoring, outsourcing, employer of records, independent contracting, contractors of record. So first, even picking the right model can be challenging, and you may make a mistake. And you may find that, okay, well, this works for one class of jobs, but it doesn't work for another class of jobs. Then you have cultural issues, right? So you may think like, oh, great, we have this fantastic person that is from the Netherlands. Fantastic, great work ethic, showing up, doing all their things. They happen to be culturally direct, and that's rubbing our manager a little bit wrong. And so we have now this workplace dynamic that may not be the healthiest. So then you have to understand how to work culturally among different folks so that you do get the best out of everyone and sort of meet people where they are. But those are all skills that you don't even know that you don't have until you're in that environment. And then, you have the situation where companies truly don't understand the laws of other places. You are very, and let me sort of give an example of that. Companies may be incredibly successful where they are, and that's why they're looking to grow. They take their ways of working, and the easy thing to do is to just use that model wherever they're hiring. When you're looking to hire in other countries, that can create cultural issues, as we've talked about, but also legal issues. US-centric companies are very used to a legal construct and a legal system that protects the company first and then the employee. Outside of the US, and particularly in the EU, it is the complete opposite. The legal construct is literally there to protect the employee, and more specifically, ongoing employment of the employee. So you have this tension between at-will employment, which is what you're used to, how you're successful, and an environment where you as a company should not ever dismiss that human, right? And of course there are reasons. There are reasons that you would, because they're acting unethically, illegally. They're creating unsafe environments for folks. All of these things are very good reasons to have someone leave your employment. But because they're not performing is not one. It's just not. Like, as an employer, you should be able to have identified that person not performing early on. And if you didn't, oh well, you had a chance. And then if they're not performing, it's your duty to bring them along. And you have to go through very formal processes in most countries in order to make sure that you're giving them a chance. And this is all to protect the economic and cultural, social systems of these countries. And it works really well for them. And that's why it's perpetuated. But if you have someone that's coming into this country, doesn't understand, for example, in the Netherlands, if someone goes on sick leave, that's about 2 years, and you really don't have a recourse for that during that time. Unlike in the US, where you've got 3 months and you're done, essentially. It's very, very different. And if you don't understand that going into it, you can get very disappointed. Another example, is French terminations. They are notoriously difficult because of the formal processes that one must go through in order to validate that this person has had a fair shake in their performance improvement plans. And there's other little sort of like fun things that make things even more challenging, like you have to give notice very formally through French mailing system, through registered mail. That is the way you have to do it. You can't do it through email. You can't do it through FedEx, like DHL. You have to use the French national system. So there are all of these little things that can just trip you up if you don't have an advisor that's helping you understand the right way to do it. Or experience in this particular geo or jurisdiction. So it can be really difficult if you don't have a partner, but these are, I think, challenges worth overcoming or learning about, because it does truly open up the opportunity for your company.
I have to admit, I did not know that it was necessary to use the French postal system, so this is news
Yes,
to me.
yes. Registered mail in the French postal system. So they
This
tend to
is
be pretty good. They tend to be pretty good, and they have tracking systems. But like and the point really is, like, for these very formal notifications, they want to make sure that the individual is getting the information they needed, right, or they need to make their decisions about what to do next. And that's okay. But it is something that is different and perhaps difficult for people operating out of that. And we didn't even go into like language requirements, right? Everything needs to be in the language of the person whom you're counseling. And that can be hard for some folks if they don't have, for instance, an HR person sitting in Bulgaria, and they need to have a performance conversation with someone in that language. So there certainly are challenges to doing this, but again, I think that the upside is really big if you can find a way to work globally and with folks uh, around the world.
Hmm. I really want us to get into the upsides. But me being me, I'm also very curious about the consequences when companies don't realize the implications of going global like this. I mean, in my first thoughts are immediately time wasted,
Mhm.
costs. Do you see something else aside of these two?
So there's definitely time wasted. There is a distraction from whatever your company's actually supposed to be doing, because these things can be very distracting, particularly for the teams that are involved in them. There can be real monetary challenges. You have just the cost of exits. You have to build into your employment models when you're working in other certain places. It's going to cost X amount of dollars to exit this person. Maybe it's 6 months of a salary, maybe it's 9 months of a salary. Um, Maybe it's just that you didn't pay the 13th, 14th month bonus, which is something that many countries have. And when you don't do these things, you can get fined. You do have to get a lawyer. You do have to navigate that. So there are costs associated with that. And I mentioned the exit cost calculus because we found across our platform that most team members, the average tenure is 18 months. So when you hire someone across the board these days, you should expect them to be there 18 months to 24 months. Job hopping is a very normalized thing across the globe right now. And it's not just in lower levels. I think at a certain point, people expected like entry level people would be moving in, moving out. That's true across all levels, including executives. So you really do need to think about the cost when you're going into it, of what it's going to cost to get out of it. But there are real costs from that relationship. There are also costs associated with operating poorly. There are costs associated with making sure that you have your data privacy and your data stored where it is, that you're only providing information that you have to. Um, People are very savvy to that outside of the US, and it's very important to them. So if you aren't safeguarding people's private information, then your brand might suffer. Separately, there are whistleblower challenges, and we can talk about the whistleblower challenges. We will talk about the whistleblower challenges, but there are real fines and fees associated with that. And that's really easy to get wrong, particularly for American centric companies. So you have, you know, fines and fees from not paying wage and hour stuff appropriately, right? You have costs of exiting humans. You have risk associated with data and privacy. You have risk associated with whistleblowing. You have tax concerns about moving your employees or them moving from one location to another. As we all learned coming out of COVID, it's not as easy as you would think to just move from one country to another, from one state to another, even if you have that eligibility to work in those places. There are tax consequences, there's administrative paperwork, and that also can add up as a cost. So there are challenges with having a mobile and global workforce that people should think about before they move in. And again, like partnering with great law firms, great folks that have already been in that area, that have expertise in this type of mobility and hiring are really helpful for companies as they're trying to figure it out. Um, and I think it's really important to find those folks where you're working.
I would second that. But also considering what you've mentioned now and all these different potential costs, what are the upsides for companies to actually do it? Because anyone who's listening to us now might go, I'm never doing that. Why would I? So, what are the upsides?
So I think the upsides are huge. There are the first most obvious upside are the humans. You can find experts that fit your corporate culture perfectly, that are going to like be dynamite employees for you and move your company forward in ways that you didn't even know could happen. So the humans are worth it every single time. It's going to probably save you money. For companies that are, looking to reduce their margins, it is particularly for US based companies, probably going to be a cost savings for you to look for workers outside of the US. Thirdly, I think the US particularly is in a place right now where it is more challenging to bring foreign workers into the US. And so if you want that diversity of thought, if you want that diversity of experience, you're going to have to go out and get it. And I should pause there because I've said diversity twice. That really matters. Diverse teams perform better. So if you want that for your company, if you want to be better, then you're going to need to purposefully seek out folks that are different, that have different perspectives. And that's something that you can do globally pretty easily. And then also there's this lovely thing about remote work, which I think is something we don't talk about enough. There are environmental and sustainable benefits to having folks not commuting, to having folks not relocating, to having folks not live in deep central, like large cities. So for those companies that are interested in their carbon footprint, then there are definite environmental and sustainable reasons to look at remote working. And then kind of the warm fuzzy piece, which is it makes communities better. For so many centuries, we had folks moving to get a job. I moved my first 4 jobs, I moved for them. And then I had to move for my partner's jobs. The amount of kind of like heartbreak and searching to find the place where you want to have a home that is tied to a job is challenging. And to be able to actually just decide where you want to make your home and then have that be your home is wonderful for the worker. It's really great for the community because this does benefit smaller communities who were losing talent to other larger cities. So it really helps these communities stay alive, helps, reinvest in these smaller communities. And then the last piece, I guess I would say, is that if you have a complicated work situation as an employee, this gives you space to perhaps be a caregiver, because you aren't having to necessarily leave your home or leave the place where your person is that you're providing care for. If you have disabilities that have historically made it more difficult for you to find mainstream employment, this may help remove that. So I think truly embracing remote work and global work can bring the best of who we are together, for these companies. And I think that just is a recipe for like fantastic results. So yes, there is a huge upside if you can navigate through the challenges, which, like I said, there are partners like Oyster, like EORs that can help you do that. There are great law firms and there are great HR consultants that can help you do that. And we all should try because it will make us better. At least I certainly think it's made Oyster successful because of how we have embraced that ethos.
I 200, 1000% agree with everything that you said. And me, myself, and my partner, we had to move because of each other's jobs. So yes, I also agree with that, that when you're able to settle down a little bit and choose your place. And the upside that you mentioned that I think is very important, and I've seen myself, is companies that have diversity, they typically perform better because you're also able to challenge each other a little bit, grow from the experiences of others. So that is also a very important point that sometimes is forgotten, I would say.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think it also helps like have tough conversations, right? Without that diversity of thought and perspective, you don't have the tough conversations that create that friction that then, turn that lump of coal into diamonds or whatever. But like you definitely need to have difference of opinions. And I think again, that comes from perspective and diversity and working with people that just have seen the world differently.
100%, 100%. Um, Miranda, you mentioned earlier a few points. For example, data privacy, you mentioned the whistleblowing directive. What are the specific laws and regulatory frameworks that often catch US companies a little bit by surprise? You've touched a little bit on it, but maybe we can delve a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think GDPR is obviously one that I think people in the US are more aware of at this point. We are aware that private information needs to stay private. I think there are intricacies around how one might approach privacy that are very cultural and very different. And we still, as the US, have a hard time approaching opting in to privacy protection versus opting out is a huge difference between the US and pretty much the rest of the world, I would say. In that, in Europe, for those of you that aren't familiar, particularly with GDPR, just like you are assumed to not want your data shared anywhere. You have a right to not have it shared. And if you agree to have your data shared, sold, whatever it is, you have to affirmatively say, yes, go ahead, take it, do whatever you want with it. But it is an affirmative act on each individual for each site, for each employer, for each vendor. It is an affirmative choice. The US is completely opposite. You are assumed to consent unless you affirmatively say, don't do it. And the way that companies can do it can be sneaky, in the way that it's not as obvious that you necessarily have a choice to opt out. Now, we are doing better in the US with those regulations. There are some states that are leading the way in how that might look, but there's still very different approaches to this problem. EU whistleblowing is a whole nother thing. Whistleblowing in the US has typically, and specifically the term whistleblowing, because there is a distinction here in the US, whistleblowing is something that was required by public companies for compliance concerns, like money laundering, like other crimes, like misreporting on an audit. It derives from the Sarbanes-Oxley Act for public companies. We also have in the US, and some states are required, the ability for someone to raise an employment concern at their work. Now, this sometimes is also called whistleblowing. An example of that would be like, I'm working, someone is making harassing comments in the lunchroom, and I want to make sure that the company knows about it. There may be a hotline, and it's often called a hotline, for an employee to report poor behavior. Or perhaps a safety hazard, something like that. And there are safety reporting requirements for some industries that are more physical, that perhaps are in a plant-like environment. But that sort of reporting is more about voluntary workplace, concerns, problems, things like that. And it's separate from Sarbanes-Oxley, which is federally mandated. In the EU, it's all one thing. It is all one big reporting thing. So if you have a concern about the person in the lunchroom, or if you think someone is taking bribes, it's the same line. So that can be confusing for folks outside of the EU because you're used to having it in a workplace policy. And then maybe you have a separate whistleblower hotline for people outside of the company or inside of the company. They're very separate. That actually, from an administrative perspective, adds more work to things, but that's how we do it in the US. And you don't have to have both of them. And, arguably companies don't have either of them, which is not best practice, but that's true. A lot of companies have neither. In the EU, obviously, whistleblowing is very important. It's one line. It is mandated for any company, public, private, doesn't matter. You have to have a way for members of your staff or the community around you that you are part of to provide feedback on the things that are going wrong in your company. And the law specifically requires people to be able to report in their own language, or at least one of the accepted EU languages. So you got to have the line. You have to be able to, communicate in a language that you feel comfortable communicating in. And by the way, we talked about GDPR, like the data can't leave Europe. So imagine like a US company, like, yeah, we have a hotline, whatever. Like someone goes to like leave a complaint. They can't have it, the prompts aren't in their language. They can't speak to someone in their language. The call gets routed to the US, and all of a sudden you've like blown like 3 or 4 base provisions of the Whistleblower Act. So it is very, very different. It is difficult for US to kind of get their heads around how different it is, because it is an important tenet of all of these countries' workplace and their ethos around work. And again, as a US based attorney, when I first was approached with it, I sort of like, whatever, it's just a helpline. That's not how it's perceived. It is perceived as a very important tenet of your worker experience. And again, without that perspective and understanding the gravity of that to the workers in that environment, it's easy to overlook it, and it's really easy to mess it up because of the very specific requirements that are so different from a US-based environment and requirement.
And I think that points back to what you mentioned earlier, that it is important for companies who do want to expand to the EU to have someone that knows and advises them, whether that is a company like Oyster or an HR professional. You need help. You need someone to guide you through this maze, let's say, that the EU can be. But at least from what I know, Miranda, Oyster itself is also a remote team, correct?
Yes.
You are operating in more than 180 countries, fully distributed teams. What does the complexity look like for you on the ground, for your legal and compliance team? Because we've spoken a little bit in abstract. How does it look in practice for you?
Yeah, so we live the complexities that we're talking about at Oyster. The legal team alone has folks from 17 different countries, just in the legal team. So we constantly are trying to find ways to work better with each other, and to manage the legal complexities. And those are two different things. We've sort of touched on culture a lot, but it does matter how you communicate. And being remote, you really have to focus on how you communicate asynchronously, in addition to how you show up on Zooms and calls, because inevitably your partner may be asleep when you get that escalation in, and vice versa. So you really need to build strong trust with each other, strong systems in order to communicate, and to share knowledge. Because again, you don't want there to be a gap in time between when you're trying to work and when your teammate and your partner are picking up the work that you're doing. So ways of working become very important, and checking your assumptions about how people are communicating at the door is really important in that environment. But then legally, the surface area of the regulations that we're looking at every day as a legal department is massive, right? And change is ongoing. We talked earlier about like the nature of the evolving law. It is absolutely evolving every single day. In the EU, we're talking about like platform directives. We're talking about how contractors are being employed. We're talking around the world about how AI impacts hiring. So the law is changing real time, and that can be a lot for folks. The way we do it, and I think the way companies that successfully manage this level of complexity are, is that you know that law takes time to change, right? Law does not change overnight. There are things that can happen that accelerate law change, but generally you have a little bit of lead time on that. So you're going to have notice, and you're going to have time to formulate how you're going to approach that compliance requirement for your workforce, for your company, whether it applies, whether it doesn't. As you well know, and I think it's sometimes a surprise for US companies operating in the EU, particularly, the EU directives are a little bit more than suggestions, but they're not law. And that's something that we have to communicate a lot with our US customers, because they'll get a thing that says the EU directive is going into effect, in June 2026. Great, but there is time that for each member state to build their own approach to the law, and you have to wait and see what Italy's going to do, what Portugal's going to do. Are they going to be the same? Probably not, because again, we're coming from these countries that have their own bodies of law, their own ways of thinking about work, and it is never going to be a clean, uniform approach to problems. It will always be a patchwork. So you do have to really sort of think about what makes sense for your workforce, and how you might apply that requirement to your workforce. And it may be that you decide, okay, we're going to use a certain legal construct. We're going to use a contractor in Poland because that makes sense for Poland. But we're going to make sure that we employ through an EOR in Germany. But we're going to create an entity in Italy because we have a lot of folks there and it's less clear what the law is. So it is truly a map it all out and keep your eyes on it, but understand that these things are changing and that there is a lot of gray. And I do want to take a minute to talk about gray. Law, as it changes, has gaps. We had no idea when, for instance, the labor and wage and hour laws that were created, in the 80s and the 90s, even those that were updated in 2000, no idea that there were going to be people on phones and computers working, 7 time zones away as a normal way of working. And so the law doesn't account for that. Law is slow to change. So you have this lag time between the reality of what's happening on the ground and how long it takes for legislators to even notice that the change has happened, to kind of understand what that shift is, and then decide if they need to protect something and how to protect it, and then how to implement that. So the time between recognizing a change in how we're working and actually legislating it can be very, very long and slow. So when people start to think about doing remote work and they're looking for very clear guidance in a particular country's jurisdiction about remote work, about using an EOR, about contracting even, there may not be a law on the books. Or there may be a law on the books that seems to indicate that this is not allowed. That's where I would ask everyone to take a breath, talk to their lawyers, talk to their network, because the law is evolving, and it's certainly evolving in the remote space. Oyster is part of an industry group called GEO, and we are actively lobbying around the globe, particularly in the EU, to help folks understand the benefits of industries like ours for their countrymen, for the companies established in those countries, and frankly for the, as we talked about, the communities, the smaller communities in those countries. But it's different, and it is at times seems to like butt heads with very traditional ideas of what work is, and there's concern that the worker needs to be protected. So we're at a place right now where the law is evolving. I think that's exciting. It can be stressful for people that are trying to look for solutions and there's no bright line like rule for things. But it is truly an opportunity to kind of lean into change and trust, be with a trusted partner. Again, I know I feel like that keeps coming up a lot, but find someone that you trust, that you think can help you through this, and then you will truly kind of, I think, be able to unlock some of these benefits from remote work.
And partners are important because they will know more than you in these specific areas. So it's good to have this type of collaboration. And I'm happy that you mentioned the gray area as well, and also the patchwork that needs to happen, because it is the reality. And even here in the EU, one of the things that I think we would say as Europeans is that legislation moves very slow and it catches up very slow. So even with this that we're talking about remote employment, they need to catch up a little bit because of the benefits that it also brings to the communities. So I hope it goes well with the lobbying for you.
It will, but it's true. Like right now, like we're just now in the EU coming to grapples with like platform contractors, the Ubers of the world, the Airbnbs of the world. We're like 20 years into this almost, right? Not quite, but about 15 to 20 years into this, and we're just now really getting clarity around those rules. So it takes time, and the reality is like you'll miss out. It's the first mover sort of idea that if you wait until there's complete certainty, the bus will have already left the station. You will have kind of missed an opportunity. But I recognize, and I work daily with folks that understand that it's a risk, and it's something that is also kind of feels unknown and feels scary. So it is a challenge for some folks, and I just want to make sure that people know that there is a real way through the complexities. But you do need someone that you can trust to talk through this, to work through this. And that goes for all of the things, right? That's one of the reasons we like you guys so much and Face Up so much, because like it's really, you need someone that understands deeply what you're trying to do and then can make sure that you're prepared to do what you need to do in order to serve your internal team members and your stakeholders, all of those things. So find your people.
That is true. Find your people. I agree. And just quick note to Europe: catch up. Don't be a laggard. I can say this. I'm European. Nobody can take that too hard. You mentioned now Face Up and that you appreciate partnering with us. So let's touch a little bit on that. You work as general counsel. What is your viewpoint in terms of what is necessary to have for an effective internal reporting system that you can operate across the countries and the jurisdictions that you're in?
Yeah. So the first one is going to be obvious. It has to be compliant, right? We have to, the dollars that you can spend as a cost center in your business are limited. So you have to make them count. So I need a system and a partner that is compliant. I need someone that understands where I'm coming from. And that means that I am in a legal department. Maybe I'm in an HR department. I don't probably have product resources. I may not have the ability to do an API. I'm not going to get that prioritized ever. So I need a product, and I look for products in the ecosphere that are truly easy to implement, and not the ones that say that they're easy to implement. And then you get like the team that comes in and you have to work with the team, and then it takes like a month and it sort of works. And then you have to work with them some more to make sure that it does work. You can do that. That's how a lot of companies work, but that's hard for a department that has a lot of other things going on that may be resource constrained. And software implementation is not our forte as lawyers, I can tell you that for sure. So we want compliance. We want a good partner that we can trust. We want someone that has a system or a way of working that is as easy as possible for us to use. And then we want something that our stakeholders can use. Because if it's not easy for them, then it's not going to be helpful for us. We need something where people can easily report things. They get what they need out of the system. And then I guess on the back end, and this sort of goes to like the system being a good one, the reality for whistleblower or any sort of complaint mechanism that you have is it is going to probably be cross-functional. You're probably going to need to take in the issue. You're going to need to assess the issue. You're going to need to talk to people, witnesses, people within the organization that may have information about the particular thing. And you need a system that allows you to do that in a way that is privileged, that maintains confidentiality, that allows you to keep records so that if you later have to provide an audit, you can do that in an easy, understandable way. And so just the overall operation of the system as you work through your life cycle really matters as well. And we've been so pleased with FaceUp, particularly because it is compliant. The choices are easy. Like implementing it was like a day or two, maybe. And everyone's just been really helpful to us as we do that. And as we've used it, it hasn't gotten, harder. I guess as we've used the system, it works exactly as we expected it to. We're able to easily route things to the right person in the right country. We have stop gaps for things to not move past the EU from those GDPR issues that we talked about earlier. We have really easy reporting in it. People are using it, which to me is great. People are using it. We have a really great example early on when we did it. We had an all hands where someone was presenting and we got feedback through the whistleblower hotline that they weren't comfortable with the way that the presenter used gender pronouns. It was good feedback. And we were able to get that feedback from the whistleblower hotline, which to me was kind of interesting, an interesting use, and immediately take that feedback and address it. We talked to the whole company. We said, thank you. Thank you for using this resource. I don't know who in the company did it. It didn't matter. Thank you for using this resource, for sharing your concern, and for making us better as a company. And it was really a great example of the system working exactly how you wanted it to. But that could have gone another way, right? We could have not had a place where someone felt safe sharing information. We could have continued to perhaps use language that made people feel marginalized or unseen. And that could have led sort of in a spiral to people not having a good working environment, perhaps then becoming disengaged, grumbling to people on the side instead of like talking directly to someone who can really kind of like make a change. So to me, that was a really great example of what I thought was an unusual use of a whistleblower hotline, but that benefited the whole company. And so I'm really grateful that we had the system in place in a way that the person felt comfortable communicating.
I'm really happy you touched on this because, I work in sales. I speak with prospects and customers every day. And I typically say to people, the tool is one side of the coin. You need the other side, which is the process in place. How are you going to manage these reports or complaints when they come in? And what you just said now, it's something that I have been advising to people is let the company know what happens when a report comes in. What are you doing about it? Have this transparency so that they know that it's not just a tool, but that it's actually being used and that it can be trusted. So I think you touched on a very important part of it. That is not just about the tool. The tool is important, but then it's all about what you're doing internally as a company, as an organization, and the culture as well around that.
For sure. And that takes effort, right? We had to update all of our policies because we had different ways of reporting things that you found challenging. So we had several policies that needed to be updated to include, to actually not to include, to replace the prior reporting methods that were disjointed between HR and whistleblowing to say like, look, this is our primary thing. Like we as a company want you to actually talk to your manager or the person directly. That is what we think candid, transparent conversation is really important for building trust. So we want you to do that. But if you don't feel like you can do that, then this is what you do. And we put it everywhere. We put it in all of the policies. We put it on all of the web pages. We put it in all of the training. So I think at a certain point, it might sound like a broken record to people, but I do believe at this point there is not a question in people's mind as to where they go. And I think that is a huge part of the equation, because to your point, like you can have a system, but if no one uses it or no one knows how to find it, then the system is not going to be doing what you want it to do. So yes, but advertise. I feel like advertising, lots of advertising, and training, but it's paying off. So it's definitely worth it. And I do think it goes a long way to build trust within your organization when you do provide avenues and venues for people to share how they're feeling and what they think, and then to kind of recognize that and share back how you're taking that in and making changes or not making changes and why.
True. And I do think that, at least in my experience and what I've seen, that employees who trust the system, who trust the company, who trust the culture, typically are more engaged as well and might be more committed to doing their best. And actually, one thing that I saw recently, and goes to your point about advertise, advertise, advertise. One of our customers has even added to their signature, to their email signature, letting people know and explaining what it is about. And we were like, something so simple, but people are still using email. So it's a great way of actually advertising internally.
It is. Absolutely.
Miranda, you mentioned already that you love us at FaceUp. We like hearing that. But there was a time that you weren't using us. You had to evaluate your options. You already touched on a few points about this, but maybe you can delve a little bit deeper. What was the most important to you when choosing a partner, a tool for you at Oyster?
We did evaluate options, and we evaluated options, and we were not originally with FaceUp. We were with a legacy provider that I'd had a lot of success with at a prior company. What we found was that in order to get the compliance that we needed for the EU, that we had to adopt an additional suite of tools or extensions that came with a very heavy cost associated with it. So it wasn't a matter of saying like, hey, I want a compliant whistleblower line. It was like, hey, I need a EU compliant whistleblower line. And that automatically created pricing pressure that was, in my view, extreme. So we started at that point looking at other vendors, because it also became clear as we started looking at vendors that there was a lack of understanding to the true requirements of what the EU required. You would find pieces of it and it would be missing in other things. Like you would find there was an ability to have another language line, but you had to pay for each additional language that you were enabling in your system. So if you have to have all of the EU languages, like you're already adding like 5 phone lines, right? So that sort of lack of understanding, like the base requires you to have five. So like your product should have five built in, type of thing was just lacking. And there was a feeling, and this is maybe coming from my software tech bias, that we needed a modern solution to this problem. And some of the legacy players just felt old, felt out of touch with the way people were communicating, felt out of touch with what we needed as a software company. And ultimately, we needed someone that understood the requirements, that did not price as if this were like some novel, precious thing. A large swath of the world had this as a base requirement, and who really had a great software stack and understood what we needed as a department and as a company. That's ultimately how we narrowed the field down. And then, as we mentioned before, that the ease of implementation is just something that you never know about until you're in it. And it was a delight, which is something that you rarely say about software implementation. So kudos on that.
Yeah, software implementation can be challenging, I would say. You just mentioned that you were also working with another provider and that you had been happy with it previously, and that you're quite happy with FaceUp since implementing it. What has stood out to you or surprised you most in terms of using FaceUp, especially because you've had experience with different systems?
This is going to sound weird, but the most exciting and interesting and unexpected thing about FaceUp is that there is absolutely nothing that I think about FaceUp ever. It is the most boring, reliable tool that I have ever used. And I mean that in the best possible way. It does exactly what it needs to do. It functions exactly as expected. There is no need for me ever to worry about it, to think about it, to be concerned when, our budget, we went up, we had re-up for budget. I didn't have to worry that like I'm now not going to be able to use this tool that I have become accustomed to. It is just a delightfully efficient and boring tool, which may not be the answer that you want, but it is truly like, it is the best thing about it, is it just works. It just
Mhm.
works, and it's easy, and we just love it for that reason.
Mm, I understand because it's a weird comparison, but for example, even in the sales world, you have so many different tools, and sometimes implementing them, getting used to them, and how difficult it is to actually get something done. When you can do something easily and you know that it's just reliable, it gives you like, it takes some pressure off. And especially, I think in your case that you're working within compliance, it's such high stakes. It's better for you to not have to worry about this.
Yes, and we don't have to worry. And so it's been delightful. We've onboarded new people onto our compliance team. They get up to speed immediately. The notifications are great. Like, it truly is very easy. It's the easy button kind of for compliance hotlines, and people are using it. And so that, again, we've talked about like a system's only as good as the use of it is, but I would argue that our stakeholders find it incredibly easy to use as well, because we have had a steady amount of use of it in a way that is exactly as you would expect and as you would hope. So I think that experience has also, I think, been favorable as well, which again, it adds to the, like, we don't have to worry about it. Not having to worry about it is just a gift in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I take no offense to you mentioning that it's boring. I understand where you're coming from. It's okay. Um, let's get a little bit into the practical advice, maybe for global companies that are trying to scale. You already touched quite a bit on this, but maybe as a recap. For companies who are trying to scale internationally, What should they be thinking about long before they even make their first hire in a specific region?
I think that their talent acquisition strategy is something that they need to really think about. What are the roles that they're hiring for? What is the talent that they need? And what are the other pressures in the business that are impacting these talent needs? Is it a particular customer that you need to support? Are there cost concerns around headcount that you need to mitigate? Are you trying to redesign an organization so that it works better in a follow the sun environment? Like, what are the business reasons that you're looking to solve? If you don't have answers to those, then trying to like fish in an ocean as large as the world is very complicated. It can be messy. You're not going to necessarily get the best results. So, really, you need to understand why you're hiring and who you need to hire. And then I would say companies should be open. They should be open to like, okay, well, if this is what I need and this is my price point, like where can I find the best talent? And at that point, then I think it's a good time to start uh, looking around and understanding like what is the legal construct that you need for these folks. Again, it may be different in different places. If you want to be able to scale up or scale down your workforce, then a contractor or a contractor of record or even a fixed term employment contract may be the way that you need to go. And there are these different levels. So once you have your talent hiring strategy, I think you then need to think about operational concerns. And this is both from a compliance perspective and a true operations perspective. Are you going to be able to communicate in this person in the language that you want, sharing data across networks in the way that you need to do, both for your own data security reasons and maybe those of your customers? You may have customers that have specific clauses in their contracts about moving data. So you need to be mindful about, okay, if we're going to build a pod of engineers, it may need to be in a particular place so that the data is held in a particular way. So it kind of gets complicated, but once you understand those pieces about what kind of talent you need, what's the problem you're trying to solve, does it need to be in a certain place? And are there particular laws or compliance requirements that we need to do that? Can I communicate with this human in a way that is productive? Then you're kind of set to move forward. Then you have a lot of options as far as how you actually connect with that person in a work relationship. Um, you have partners, you can set up your own entities, you can work through, outsourcing companies or outsourced resources. There's lots of ways to do this. But that's sort of the kind of way that I would structure what you're doing. And all along the way, you're going to want to be doing checks on, how do I, am I compliant? Am I keeping data a certain way? Am I meeting the requirements for wage and hour? Am I making sure that health and safety is taken care of in a certain way? There are many, 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 many check marks along the way to make sure that you're doing this properly. Can I do a background check? We haven't even talked about that. Like, can I do a background check? What does this look like in this country? An HR professional's role is incredibly complicated right now. They are very valuable people to your company because they're not just managing people anymore. They are navigating hiring strategy that can really make a huge difference in how successful your company may be near and long term. And that type of complexity requires true expertise and valuable skills from these HR experts. So if you're an HR person, like, good job. Like, we're here for you. You have a really, really tough job these days, and truly can move businesses in a way that I think is quite strategic and really impressive when you see HR folks at the top of their game. I'm continually awed by the folks that we have at Oyster and the way that they think and what they do. But you definitely need to have that skill, if not in your company, in your Rolodex, as you look to kind of move internationally, and to make sure you're ready. Because just like any system, if you go into a market, if you take your bias from the US, go to Europe, think that that's going to work, it's not. I mean, it might, you might get lucky, but like the ways of working are different. The ways of thinking are different. And if you really want to be successful, you have to go beyond legal requirements and really operational requirements and really kind of understand the group of folks that you're trying to motivate. Because that's really how you then, those synergies start firing and how you start really getting better faster and accelerating the business.
All very, very good points. But it does sound extremely complex. And I would say almost like you're racing through an obstacle course and trying not to fall. So for those that are working within legal, compliance, HR people, as you've mentioned, what advice would you give to them to be able to stay ahead of obligations without becoming overwhelmed? Because I think given the situation globally, it might be very, very easy to get overwhelmed.
Yes, it is very easy to get overwhelmed. And this is why I love what I do. The EOR industry is the answer for this problem, particularly at the outset. If you are looking to truly test markets, test remote talent, use a partner, use an EOR like Oyster or our competitors to truly see if this works for your company. See if you get benefit from this company. The risk is really low to using a partner that can help you explore what might be possible with your workforce in a scaffolded, safe way. If it works, then that's great. Then you can expand, you can try new countries, you can try different positions. And if it's really working for you, then it may make sense for you as a company to create an entity and really kind of double down with larger pods of workers in particular countries. It may allow you to service a customer that you're excited to get that's particularly larger, but you do need, perhaps follow the sun coverage or a particular language requirement to service. Like there are ways for you to try this safely and cost efficiently without trying to, set up entities, have lawyers draft your own contracts. Try to navigate through how to get a bank account in that particular geo to pay the person perhaps. So use the resources that exist right now to see if it's a right fit for your company. And then if it is, then you will slowly be building that expertise and meeting the people that can help you develop your own strategy, whether it is, like I said, it's setting up an entity there, doing your own payroll there, or perhaps withdrawing from the company because the country because it didn't work. And that's real. You may try to start working in Turkey thinking that it's a perfect market for what you're selling, and then ultimately it just doesn't work. You want to be able to then sort of pull back, rethink, and then maybe go forward. And I do think that using EORs and other staffing agencies and things like that give you an opportunity to test. And that's what we should do, right? We should test, we should iterate, and kind of move forward. And I think that is really for HR professionals. Just like FaceUp is our easy button, I think that this industry is an easy button for HR professionals to try new things and to test those talent strategies in what we've talked about as an evolving world and an evolving eco-structure for workforce.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think those are very, very, very good tips. And thank you so much for all the insights you've shared today, Miranda. I do have, if you're up for it, a sneaky last question.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to some of the conversation we had, but one thing that I hear a lot when I'm speaking with either HR or compliance folks is that we don't get any reports. Everything is great. We don't need it. What would you say to someone who says that not receiving any reports, whistleblowing, HR related, is something good?
I think that's terrible. I mean, let's be clear. Like, I don't want a report a day. Like that to me is an indicator that there is really bad stuff going on. But if I don't get a report, then there's a lot of, for me, blind spots then. Am I not getting a report because people are scared to report something? Am I not getting a report because they don't know how to report something? Am I not getting a report because they're just so disengaged they don't care to even make a report? Any of those things are bad. All of those things will create problems for my company as we continue to go about our business. So if I am not getting a report, then I have no way of knowing if my messaging is getting across, if there is a problem that is brewing, or if we're being effective as counselors and HR professionals in supporting our workforce. So, if you aren't getting, if it's radio silence on your thing, then my guess is they probably don't even know that it's there, A, or they don't know how to get there, or they don't have time to get there. Or B, the much scarier thing is maybe they're just afraid, or they don't think you're going to do anything about it. And existentially, I think that's probably a much worse place to be in, because then you lose track of what's going on and how to make things better and how to make everyone more effective at work. So yeah, no reports are bad. So I completely agree with you on that.
I didn't even say my opinion much, but I think it's better coming from you. You're not biased like I am, I think. So better to hear from a compliance officer like yourself.
Is that real though? People think that it's good that they're not getting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear this weekly, my colleagues as well.
Oh, well, I feel like people are missing an opportunity. If they aren't hearing things from their staff. I mean, some of it's ticky-tack that we get through. Some of it's really small things that you're wondering, like, okay, like let's get a different flavor of beverage in the break room. I mean, we don't have break rooms, we're fully distributed, but it's along those same lines of things. But sometimes it's real. It's impactful, and I think you can really miss an opportunity to make things better for the individual that's reporting, but generally the entire company if you aren't getting feedback like that. So I hope for everyone that they get at least one whistleblower thing this quarter. I hope it's a good one, but like, may everyone get one. We all need to be better. There's something we can all do to be better, right? And it's that kind of feedback that we get through these types of lines that I think help drive that, or can drive that.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, we heard it. The goal for the quarter is get at least one report. Let's improve our communication internally. Miranda, you're such a pleasure to speak with. And thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. You shared such a wealth of knowledge and experience that I think is very, very valuable for our listeners. And I also think that your examples made the challenges very real. They highlight how important it is for organizations to stay ahead of both regulatory and cultural expectations. So for our audience today, if you're more curious about these topics, I highly suggest that you go give Miranda a follow on LinkedIn. You can also go and follow Oyster for more information on these areas. And if you, on the other hand, would like to explore what a reporting system looks like and how it can support you on your own global setup, you can speak with one of us here at FaceUp. We can show you a demo for you to assess how it fits with your organization's needs or not. Thank you again for spending the time with us today, Miranda. It was such a pleasure to have you. And bye to our audience.
It was. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for building such a great tool.